Imagine walking into your local bank branch tomorrow morning, the same one you've visited for decades, only to be told that you can no longer withdraw your own money the way you always have. This isn't some dystopian fantasy or a plot from a thriller novel, this is the stark reality facing millions of pensioners across the United Kingdom right now. Banks are quietly implementing new withdrawal limits specifically targeting those over 65, and the implications could fundamentally change how you access your hard-earned savings. If this concerns you as much as it should, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. The banking industry is undergoing what officials are calling a digital transformation, but what does this really mean for the average pensioner who has spent their entire working life contributing to the economy? The evidence suggests that major UK banks including Barclays, NatWest, Halifax, and Lloyds are all implementing varying degrees of cash withdrawal restrictions, and pensioners are bearing the brunt of these changes. Let's examine what's actually happening on the ground. Reports from across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland indicate that banks are introducing daily withdrawal limits as low as £50 for customers over 65, citing security concerns and fraud prevention. But is this really about protecting elderly customers, or is it about pushing them toward digital banking solutions that many find confusing and intimidating? When Mrs. Margaret Thompson from Cardiff tried to withdraw £300 for her grandson's birthday last month, she was told she could only take £50 per day, meaning she'd need to visit the bank 6 times to access her own money. How is this acceptable in a democratic society where people should have unrestricted access to their own funds? The justification given by banking executives centers around protecting vulnerable customers from scams and fraud, which admittedly has increased dramatically in recent years. However, critics argue that blanket restrictions on cash withdrawals represent a dangerous precedent that could lead to even more severe limitations in the future. What happens when these £50 limits become £25, or when banks decide that pensioners can only access their money through digital platforms they struggle to navigate? Are we sleepwalking into a cashless society where the most vulnerable members of our community are effectively excluded from full participation in the economy? The broader implications extend far beyond simple inconvenience. Many pensioners rely on cash for their daily transactions, from paying for groceries at local markets to giving money to grandchildren or contributing to charity collections at church. When banks restrict cash access, they are not just limiting financial transactions, they are restricting social participation and personal autonomy. Consider the elderly widow who has always managed her household budget with cash envelopes for different expenses, or the grandfather who likes to slip a £20 note to his grandchild during visits. These time-honored practices become impossible when banks arbitrarily decide how much of your own money you can access. Furthermore, the timing of these restrictions raises serious questions about the motivations behind them. Why are these limits being introduced now, when inflation is already squeezing pensioner incomes and the cost of living crisis is forcing many elderly people to make difficult choices between heating and eating? Is it merely coincidental that these restrictions are being implemented just as the government is pushing toward a fully digital economy, or is there coordination between banking institutions and policymakers to accelerate the transition away from cash regardless of the impact on vulnerable populations? The technical infrastructure supporting these restrictions also deserves scrutiny. Banks claim their systems can identify potentially fraudulent transactions and protect customers by limiting withdrawals, but these same systems frequently flag legitimate transactions as suspicious, leaving pensioners stranded without access to their money when they need it most. How many elderly customers have been embarrassed at shop counters when their cards are declined because the bank's algorithm decided their normal grocery shopping pattern looked suspicious? What can pensioners do to protect themselves in this changing landscape? Knowledge is power, and understanding your rights as a banking customer is crucial. Banks are required to provide reasonable access to your funds, but the definition of reasonable is increasingly being interpreted in ways that favor institutional convenience over customer needs. Document every interaction with your bank, especially when withdrawal requests are denied or limited. Consider maintaining accounts with multiple banks to ensure you're not completely dependent on one institution's policies. Most importantly, don't be afraid to complain formally when these restrictions impact your ability to manage your finances effectively. The question we must all ask ourselves is whether we're willing to accept this gradual erosion of financial freedom in exchange for promises of enhanced security. When did accessing your own money become a privilege that banks can grant or withhold at their discretion? The answer to that question will determine whether future generations of retirees will enjoy the financial independence that previous generations took for granted, or whether they'll find themselves at the mercy of banking algorithms and corporate policies that prioritize profit over people.